Emily, so first off, really good job adjusting your tone and making the overall approach much more active. I'm really impressed at how much adjustment that I see in here, and it's much less talky lectury and a lot more interactive, engaging the student as a partner in the pedagogy, which is challenging to do in this very static environment. So that's my first feedback. Now, one thing that I want to just warn or put out there. So part of as we're going out through this, I'm thinking like, okay, what is the possible feedback, negative feedback we might get from reviewers or other instructors? And one thing is, so with the textbook, we're using right now lots and lots of cases. I think overall, this is a good thing. It shows lots of different contexts of applying the same principle, but some potential feedback that we might get is, oh, it's too overwhelming, and maybe invest in a couple cases and refer to them throughout. Which is a legitimate point of view. I think now I'm siding on the approach that we're going with of introducing lots of little cases that we just invest with a short time. But I just want to put that out there, something for us to consider and to be aware that we might get that feedback. Now, I thought this was really strong. I like the way I do like this, including the actual screenshot. This, of course, when in the process of revising, I think should be condensed a lot, but this is great for a first draft. And I really like this case study with Naomi in here. Now, things get a little bit more talky when you get to these other scenarios. And I think part of it is that you haven't quite pinpointed what exactly you want students to get from this. So I'm going to switch over here because I spent a bunch of time after I read through this draft. I spent about an hour just kind of brainstorming and organizing what are the main points. And this is really challenging here because this chapter goes hand in hand with the chapter that I'm writing on research. But let me show you what I came up with. So here, this is what I see as your chapter. So here are the main points. I think we want students to see resistance as something that's natural, kind of inevitable and productive. And then they should develop a research strategy that will help them find that resistance and locate it early, and maybe even make that as a key point. Locate resistance as early as possible. Okay, and it should shape the idea. And so as a first thing that we need to do is that somebody like Naomi in that paperless office case needs to troubleshoot possible resistance so that she can develop a research strategy. And that's specifically what the library didn't do. The director should have looked through all of this and said, well, what are the pain points? What's the issue? Oh, this is depending on volunteers. I need to make sure that we really have this. So we really want to make the case that students should be, that your research needs to go hand in hand with potential obstacles or sticking points in here. And then that we should also explore alternative solutions, that when you get resistance, don't just try to force your idea, but consider alternatives. Now, like I said, this goes hand in hand with the research chapter. So I sketched out what are my high-level goals. I think these are good high-level goals. I'm not sure about this one. I think this is something that we want to mention, that we want to bring out, but leave it as a secondary goal. These are the things that I think we want to hit really hard. And actually, when I get to what I brainstormed below, actually, this last one might have to do resist, sometimes we have to merge competing values. Okay, something like that. Responding to competing values. All right, so here's what I'm trying to do in the research chapter. The big takeaway is that research is multifaceted, and that they have to think about research differently, not just as library research. And then I want to introduce them to different research methods like surveys, conversations, blah, blah, blah. These are the different reasons that you want to do research onto your proposal at the social problem solving level. Now, this is interesting. When we get to the problems chapter, we might want to talk about, you need to do some research to establish your problem. I think, though, maybe we focus the research chapter for now on the social problem solving level. But we might want to revisit it and say, here's what you do at the social level. Here's what you do at the idea level, establishing that you have a problem. And then this chapter will show, here's how you talk to people. Here is how you write a meeting. All right. Now, I also, so here's a revised outline, and I'll, of course, send this to you for the chapter you're working on. So first, have a little bit at the beginning, connect to the previous chapter on research strategies. Last chapter, you learned a range of research strategies. Here, we're going to delve into stakeholders and research because it's such a problem. Then I think one of the common problems is falling in love with an idea. So writing up the backpack case so that it really shows how the churches, in this case, are just so in love with the idea they're not listening to anything. And then have students do a little reflection. This could be either a for discussion or a written exercise. But one thing that I think we want to do is, how do you think the principal, the people in the community perceive these church groups, the teachers perceive these church groups? Okay, what are the actual outcomes? Certainly the principal, I think, is probably a little bit frustrated. Possibly teachers are too. The kids who get the backpack probably aren't super effective. They're like, oh, it's nice, a free thing, but not, don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. Getting them to think through the outcomes. All right. And then when we move into the talky part, really kind of emphasize this is kind of arrogance. I think something that would work really well in here is there's tons of these cases where do-gooder groups have gone into third world countries and said, oh, we're going to give you X, and it's not what people need. The case that I'm thinking of, that I talked with somebody, it could have been you. I'm thinking it was someone else. Just a case where some people went into a community and they saw that the women in the community were spending so much time grinding grain or something like this and shelling it, so they developed a machine or some kind of process for them to do it, and when they went back, nobody was using it. And it turned out that this was what women did during their downtime, and it was a real social hour for them. And so they didn't want a machine. This was kind of, they're grinding grain while they're talking. pulling out a scenario like that. All right. Then with the library case, I think what's going on here, it's also a version of being in love with your idea. It's a variation on it, but the main problem is fake listening, which people do a lot. Oh, I checked, nobody said anything, I'm good, which is a problem. And this is a case where I think we really want to talk about really proactively seeking out obstacles and developing a research strategy so that you figure out these obstacles. And you should be able to do this and ask questions that are going to uncover these things. And in the previous chapter, we should have taught them some respectful ways to ask questions that take advantage of, or don't waste people's time. So then in the case of the library, I mean, it just seems like the whole plan hinging on the volunteers is such a huge thing, and they should have done tons of research to make sure that this is actually viable, and they didn't. So so make that case. And the reason they didn't is because the director's so in love with this idea and this perspective, and so engaged in some fake listening here. And so then with the paperless office, I think this activity can be focused on how can Naomi really develop a proactive research strategy so that she hears these voices. I think this is such a key point that we might want to have a second activity that right after this that does the same thing. So you might want to go through scenarios that you've already written up and see if you can use one of those. And then I think the third problem is vilifying stakeholders. And here, I think, as I was looking through, I'm kind of like, what's this about? I think it really happens when we get a clash of values that we have this value, help the homeless people, but the people who live in the area have a value like, well, we want to have safe neighborhoods. We want to have clean neighborhoods. We want to have particular, zoning laws. We don't want particular, we have to manage, so competing values sort of control over neighborhood. And so it's easy when we have these competing values to vilify the other person. And I think the case we really want to make here is try and find a way to merge the values. That this is normal, this is natural. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. It doesn't mean that they can't see your point of view. But we really need to look and respect other people's values and write about research alternatives that show that respect and talk about things in a way that show respect. And this is really necessary for developing alternative solutions. I think a really good exercise here would be if we could give some really short, small cases, things where there might be some competing values, and just ask students to brainstorm what are some ways to develop an alternative that can merge these competing values. And the more do some community ones, but we probably need to do a couple more workplace ones in this chapter, since it's kind of at the moment really heavily biased towards community type projects. Okay, hope this makes sense. Let me know if you want a phone call to talk through this further, and go ahead and confirm in an email if you're motivated to kind of rewrite this along this outline. And the order that I've suggested, I went back and forth on which one should be first. and stuff. So as you're writing it up, you put them in a different order. That's fine. You don't really need to justify that. But I think this is hitting on the key things. And as part of my process, one thing that I often do in my writing is I do a lot of writing on a separate piece of paper. And so I will write at the top, the problem I am trying to solve is, and then I kind of write down and try to get a good articulation of the problem. And so that's where these come from. My sort of starter sentence of the problem I'm trying to solve in this chapter is blah, blah, blah. But I think this is moving along very, very nicely. And I'm hoping to send to Susan and Danielle sometime today or tomorrow, chapter 1, and kind of an overview of where we're going and get some feedback from them. Awesome.